Mercy was always described as a gift from the powerful, but Rowena had learned that mercy inside a fortress of laws and ranks was usually a ledger entry, a temporary delay before the next cruelty was collected with interest. Hope did not disappear all at once. It thinned, thread by thread, until surviving became a craft measured in silence, in lowered eyes, in how quickly bruises could be hidden beneath sleeves that were never truly hers. By the time she reached 19 winters, she no longer prayed to be rescued. She prayed to stay unnoticed long enough to decide her own name still belonged to her. The Duskwalker estate crouched along the eastern ridgeline like a jaw of black stone, all iron gates, smoke-stained towers, and narrow windows that never opened far enough to admit full daylight. Servants moved through it in gray shifts, heads bowed, wrists ringed with dull iron cuffs stamped with the pack crest. Rowena's cuffs were older than most, their edges rough where someone had filed away a broken lock and left the metal jagged against her skin. Every morning she wrapped cloth under the bands before the overseers arrived. Every evening she peeled it away and watched shallow cuts reopen, red lines crossing older white scars like tally marks no one intended her to outlive. "You missed a spot?" Overseer Bram's boot struck the side of her bucket and sent dirty water across the flagstones. Again. Rowena dropped to her knees before the water reached the parchment crates stacked in the corridor. Bram loved fines, loved beatings more, but fines let him drag punishment across days. She pushed the rag forward with both hands, scrubbing in fast circles while her shoulder ached from hauling coal. He crouched beside her, breath sour with spiced liquor. "You hear me when I speak, Cuff Girl?" "Yes." "Yes what?" "Yes, Overseer Bram." "Better." He stood. "You report to the lower storeroom after dusk. The Eastern Alpha has guests tonight. If one platter is late, you sleep outside the walls." Outside meant frostbite by morning this high in the mountains. Outside meant wolves that answered no horn call. Bram smiled because he knew she understood. By the second week of the harvest moon, Rowena had learned every blind turn between the kitchens and council hall, every floorboard that sang when stepped on, every guard whose attention wandered when dice clicked against wood. She learned because knowledge was the only weapon a collared woman could carry without it being confiscated. She learned because she had one stolen object tucked beneath the inner seam of her sleeve, and if anyone found it, she would not live to explain she did not even know what it was. The signet had come into her hands 3 nights earlier, when she was ordered to clear ashes from a burned ledger room after a drunken dispute among Duskwalker lieutenants. Beneath a cracked stone shelf, wrapped in charred velvet, she found a ring too large for her finger, forged in old silver-black metal that held moonlight instead of reflecting it. Its face bore a crescent crown crossed by branching runes unlike any packmark she recognized. The instant she touched it, a low hum moved through her palm and up her arm, not pain, not warmth, but the sharp certainty that surrendering it would mean surrendering the last piece of a story someone had tried to erase. So she hid it. Now, in the lower storeroom, she carried trays of cured meat, steeped root broth, and dark bread toward the council chamber while voices leaked through the half-open doors. "She is not in the records," one man said, clipped and impatient. "Then write one," answered another. "Put her among the debt-born. No family claim, no breeding claim, no contest rights." Rowena slowed without meaning to. A hand seized the back of her collar and shoved her forward. "Move," hissed Mara, senior housekeeper, eyes flat as winter river stones. "Stand there until called. Do not breathe loud enough to offend them." Inside, Jasper Duskwalker sat at the head of a long table under antler chandeliers, broad shoulders draped in iron-gray fur. His hair was braided back from a severe face, and his fingers drummed once on the armrest as Rowena set the first tray down. He did not look at her as a person. He looked as men looked at roads, bridges, livestock, useful until worn out. Girl, Jasper said at last. She kept her gaze lowered. Alpha, you were assigned to North Stores this month. Overseer Bram moved me to hall service for tonight. Bram stepped from the wall shadows and bowed. Temporary necessity, Alpha. Jasper's mouth curled in irritation, not anger. Anger was loud, irritation was colder, and somehow worse. Temporary ends now. She shifts to caravan inventory. Dawn departure. Mark her transport status. Rowena's hands went still around the tray edge. Caravan inventory meant border trade camps where servants vanished without witness. Marking transport status meant a secondary iron brand at the base of the throat, visible even in winter clothing. She lifted her head before caution could stop her. I ask leave to remain in fortress service, she said, voice rough. Silence spread down the table. Mara inhaled sharply through her teeth. Jasper turned toward her fully for the first time. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and utterly bored. You ask? Yes. On what grounds? Rowena felt the ring press against her wrist as if reminding her that fear and obedience were not the same thing. I can read inventory ledgers. I am faster in the lower halls than most assigned hands. I can serve better here. One lieutenant laughed. Another muttered, She bargains now. Jasper rose. The room seemed to shrink with him standing. You mistake utility for leverage. You have neither name nor standing in this pack. You are fed because it profits me, not because you deserve a hearing. He stepped close enough that she could smell winter leather and steel oil. At dawn, you are loaded with the Eastern train. If you run, hunters take you back in chains. If you resist, Bram removes a finger before each mile marker until you remember your place. I remember my place, Rowena said softly. Then keep to it. He turned away. She carried the rest of the trays with hands that barely trembled, then returned to the scullery and worked until the lamps burned low. When the kitchen finally emptied, she sat beside the ash bin and pressed both palms to her knees to stop shaking. I am still here. I am still breathing. I am not a thing they own because they named me one. If I board that caravan at dawn, I disappear into their roads and records, and no one will ever know where I ended. If I stay, I vanish slower. This is the shape of the trap. 2 doors, both locked from the outside, and a voice in my head that sounds like survival whispering, choose the smaller loss. But I remember my mother humming in the dark, telling me songs are maps when walls erase paths. I remember a ring hidden in cloth and the way it answered my skin like it recognized me. I have one night, one chance to be more than inventory. She stood and moved. The decision itself took less than a heartbeat. The preparation took an hour of quiet theft, a heel of bread from cooling racks, a skin of water from the laundry casks, a wool cloak with a torn hem, a narrow-bladed kitchen knife she prayed she would not need. At the servants' washroom, she unwound the cloth around her wrists and reset it tighter, then pushed the signet deeper into her sleeve seam and stitched the opening closed with black thread pulled from a blanket edge. Mara found her near the back stair. Where are you going with that cloak? Rowena forced her breathing even. Coal run for the night braziers. Mara stepped closer, gaze tracking the bread under Rowena's arm, the water skin, the knife-shaped bulge at her hip. For 3 long seconds, neither spoke. Then Mara's jaw clenched. If you are caught, Mara said, barely above a whisper, I never saw you. Rowena blinked. Why? A brittle laugh escaped Mara, humorless and tired. Because once I tried too. Go before I remember fear better than shame. Rowena slipped through the service arch and into the rear yard, boots crunching over thin frost. Wind knifed down from the peaks, carrying pine resin, smoke, and the metallic scent of coming snow. 2 hounds barked from the kennel row, then quieted as she tossed scraps of salt pork through the bars. At the east wall she climbed stacked timber, fingers numb against stone, and hauled herself to the narrow maintenance ledge that ran beneath the watch platform. A horn sounded from the main gate. Not alarm. Shift change. She dropped to the outer slope and rolled, snowmelt soaking through her cloak. Pain flared in her ankle, sharp enough to make her gasp, but it held when she stood. She ran downhill through black firs, branches whipping her face, breath tearing in her chest. Behind her, another horn call rose, higher this time, then shouting. "They're counting hands," she whispered, and ran harder. The forest fell away after an hour into broken shale and wind-carved ridges. Moonlight laid silver across the mountain road, and far to the west, beyond a ravine choked with mist, she saw towers cut into a cliff face, torch lines burning along high walls. Thornwood Fortress, seat of the mountain pack that had fought Duskwalker patrols for 3 generations and took no allegiance from Eastern War alphas. Refuge? If she reached the gate alive. Interrogation, almost certainly. Possibly chains under a new crest, still better than a caravan cage. Behind her, wolves answered the second alarm horn, distant but closing. Rowena tightened her grip on the water skin, tasted blood where she had bitten her lip raw, and stepped onto the narrow pass toward the mountain fortress as night gathered its teeth around her. The path was little more than a scar in the rock, one shoulder scraping cold stone, the other open to a drop that swallowed moonlight whole. Wind shoved at her back in hard bursts, as if the mountain itself could not decide whether to cast her down or drive her forward. A howl split the dark behind her, close enough now that she heard the second voice answer from lower on the ridge. Duskwalker hunters. She forced her legs to move faster despite the throb in her ankle, counting breaths to stop panic from stealing rhythm. 20 steps. Inhale, 20 more. Exhale. When the pass bent around a jut of granite, torchlight flared below, not 1 or 2 points but a line of fire along battlements carved into the cliff. Thornwood. Relief came so hard it almost dropped her where she stood. Then horns blared from the fortress yard, urgent and dissonant, and the gate lights lurched as figures ran across the bridge span. Shouts carried up the slope, too many voices overlapping to parse, then the unmistakable sound of claws striking stone and men cursing through clenched teeth. Rowena stumbled down the final switchback and reached the outer ditch just as a pair of sentries leveled spears at her chest. "Stop there!" She froze, breath ripping from her throat. "I am unarmed. I am running from Duskwalker territory. Please." Both guards wore Thornwood wolf crests burned into leather vambraces, their posture disciplined even in chaos. One was younger, broad-faced and wary. The other, older, had a scar splitting his brow and eyes that missed nothing. He took in her torn cloak, the iron cuffs, the blood on her lip. "Name," he said. "Rowena Darkhollow." "Pack." The word caught in her ribs. "None. Not anymore." The younger guard swore softly. "Captain, we have movement East Ridge." "Hold!" The older one snapped, but his gaze stayed on Rowena. "You came alone?" A crash thundered from inside the gate tunnel. Men shouted for chains. Someone screamed, not in fear, but in command, then was cut off with a guttural snarl so deep it vibrated through the stones under Rowena's boots. She flinched despite herself. The captain cursed, "Get her behind the line." Before either guard moved, 3 warriors burst from the tunnel dragging weighted nets around a massive half-shifted male who fought like a storm given teeth. He was not fully wolf, not fully human, fur bristling along his shoulders and forearms, claws gouging sparks from the paving as he lunged and twisted. 2 soldiers already lay against the wall, conscious but dazed, armor dented where he had thrown them. Another warrior clung to the net ropes, boots skidding as the male slammed him into a post hard enough to crack wood. "Sedative did nothing," someone yelled. "Get him to the pit before he tears out again." The male's head whipped toward the sound, profile lit by torch fire, dark hair matted with sweat, jaw bloodied where fangs had cut his own lip, eyes wild with a pain that looked less like rage and more like drowning. A fourth soldier approached with a pole hook, and the captive roared, wrenching one arm free. Claws raked air inches from the man's throat. Rowena did not decide to move. Her body moved first, one step past the spear line, hand lifting as if she could catch the moment before it shattered. The captain barked at her to get back. She barely heard him. That sound inside the male's chest was wrong. Not cruelty, not triumph. Desperation. Her mother's lullaby rose in memory with the same inevitability as breath. She hummed. At first it was thin, almost lost under shouting, a low minor cadence meant for dark rooms and frightened children who needed proof. Dawn existed even when no light showed under the door. Rowena closed her eyes for one heartbeat and found the next note, then the next, letting the melody settle into her bones until the tremor in her hands eased. The courtyard changed by increments. The struggling male paused mid-lunge, shoulders locked. Warriors tightened ropes, waiting for him to explode again. He did not. Rowena kept humming, voice no louder than wind through pine needles. His chest heaved once, twice, claws slowly retracted. Fur along his arms receded as if dragged back beneath skin by sheer force of will. Silence spread outward in a ring. The captain stared at her like she had set fire to rain. The male sank to one knee, palms braced on stone, head bowed. When he lifted his face, his eyes were still not human, amber bright and feral, but focused now, present. He looked directly at Rowena with a raw, searching intensity that made every instinct in her body sharpen at once. Then he spoke, voice hoarse and rough-edged. "Keep singing." She should have run. She should have obeyed the guard now grabbing her elbow. Instead, she gave him one more line of the lullaby. His breathing steadied another fraction. Around them, armed men held position, confused and ready in equal measure. A horn call sounded from the ridge behind Rowena, 3 short blasts. Duskwalker pursuit had reached the pass mouth. The captain reacted instantly. "Archers to east wall, close outer gate, bring him inside now, and take her with us." 2 soldiers moved to flank Rowena. The half-shifted male surged to his feet as if to follow, and every weapon in the courtyard snapped toward him. He bared his teeth, then forcibly unclenched his jaw and stepped back, trembling with restraint. "I said inside," the captain repeated. "All of you." They hustled her through the gate tunnel as bolts slammed home behind them. Above, archers shouted ranges. The fortress interior opened into layered courtyards climbing the cliff, torchlight cutting across stone stairs and rune-marked archways. Rowena's legs wobbled with delayed shock. A healer in green-gray robes met them at a run, saw the restrained male and swore with weary familiarity. Again. "Worse," the captain said. He jerked his chin toward Rowena. She calmed him. The healer's gaze snapped to her wrists, her face then back to the male. "Put him in lower infirmary cell 2, not irons, padded restraints. And someone explain why a stranger is standing in my yard while raiders at our wall." "Later," said the captain. "She comes with witness guard." Rowena was guided across a corridor lined with narrow windows where moonlight pooled blue on the floor. She kept her left arm pinned to her ribs, fingers shielding the seam of her sleeve where the silver-black signet hid against scarred skin, its faint hum answering her pulse. Behind her, the restrained male gave one low growl, not threat this time, almost warning. She turned before she could stop herself. He was being hauled the opposite direction, shoulders rigid, head half lowered, but his eyes found hers through the press of bodies and held. Something ancient looked out through that stare, not mindless fury but recognition sharpened to a blade. Heat pulsed beneath her skin from collarbone to wrists, a strange, steady thrum that had nothing to do with fear. By the time they locked her into a small holding room adjoining the infirmary, her knees shook so badly she had to sit on the floor to keep from collapsing. Only then did she slip 2 fingers under her cuff, feel the crescent crown edge still cold and hidden, and tuck it deeper before the latch settled. I should feel only terror. I crossed into enemy territory. I sang to a stranger in the middle of a fight, and now armed men are deciding whether I am useful or dangerous. But the moment he looked at me, the world narrowed into one impossible line, as if a thread hooked under my ribs and pulled toward him. This is not safety. This is not sense. My body remembers cages and commands, and still some buried part of me leans toward that gaze like frostbitten hands reaching for fire. I do not trust men who carry power in their voices. I do not trust kings, alphas, any title that turns people into property. Yet he asked for song, not obedience. He fought himself to listen. Why does that matter so much? 3 hours passed before anyone returned. Near dawn, when the fortress had gone from battle roar to exhausted quiet, the healer reopened the door and gestured for her to stand. "He woke," she said. "He asked for the humming woman?" Rowena wrapped her cloak tighter. "Who is he?" The healer hesitated, then chose her words with care. "A soldier under my charge. You will speak only when asked. You will not approach unless told. If he destabilizes, you stop singing and leave at once. Do you understand?" Yes. Cell 2 was no cell at all but a reinforced infirmary chamber with carved moon runes along the threshold and thick blankets thrown over stone benches to soften impact. A single lamp burned near the cot. The male sat on the edge of it, bare forearms bandaged, dark hair damp at the temples as if fever had only just broken. He looked up when Rowena entered, and the room seemed to tilt. His irises shifted, amber bleeding brighter through brown until no human color remained. He drew a sharp breath, fingers digging into the mattress. Rowena stopped just inside the doorway because if she took another step, she was not sure her legs would obey anything except that pull in her chest. For a suspended beat, neither moved. Then warmth spread low in her spine, quick and startling, like moonlight turned to current running through marrow. Her pulse answered from everywhere at once: throat, wrists, knees. Awareness prickled along every inch of skin. The scent in the room changed: pine smoke and clean steel and something darker. Rain on stone before thunder, wrapping around her senses with devastating familiarity. The male stood too fast, swayed, caught himself on the cot frame. "Name," he said, voice gravel deep and urgent, as if the single word cost him effort. "Rowena Darkhollow." His jaw flexed, a tremor ran through him, not weakness but control stretched thin. He took one step back from her, then another step forward despite it, caught between instinct and discipline so visible it hurt to watch. The healer shifted by the wall, suddenly very still. The male swallowed once. "Rowena." He said it like a vow and a wound. "Tell me you are real." She almost laughed because she had spent years wishing she could ask the same question of herself. "I am real." His eyes closed for a heartbeat. When they opened, the predator was there, clear and unhidden, yet focused entirely on her, as if nothing else in the fortress mattered. "Mate," he whispered. The word hit harder than any shouted command Jasper had ever given. Panic surged first, old and immediate. Mate meant claim, hierarchy, loss of choice. But the sensation under the panic was worse because it was gentler. Relief so fierce it made her throat ache. Seen, not catalogued. Wanted, not traded. She hated how much she wanted to believe that difference. The healer cleared her throat. "Tobias." Rowena's head snapped toward her. "Tobias." The soldier held her gaze. "Tobias Thornwood." Understanding landed in jagged pieces, not merely a soldier. Thornwood by name, and every posture in the room bending around him like gravity had entered with his breath. The captain's deference, the healer's careful tone, the restrained violence at the gate. Alpha King. Rowena took one involuntary step back. You hid your rank. I hid my crown, he said quietly. Not from you. From enemies who count my dead. He spread his hands, palms empty, and even that simple gesture carried restrained power. I will not touch you without permission. The thread between them tightened anyway, bright and undeniable, humming in the same cadence as her mother's song. She could feel it in the space between their bodies, in the way his breathing matched hers after only seconds, in the way his gaze dropped once to the scars at her wrists and turned molten with grief and fury he forced himself not to unleash. Outside, dawn bells began to ring over the fortress, low and resonant. Inside, locked eye to locked eye, Rowena realized she was no longer standing at the edge of one cliff, but two. The danger she had fled, and the danger of being fully known. The healer took a cautious step forward, as if crossing thin ice. Your Majesty, you need rest and containment before. No titles in here, Tobias said, though his gaze never left Rowena. The command held no sharpness, only strain. He inhaled slowly through his nose, grounding himself. Moraine, check her wrists first. Rowena blinked. You are injured. So are you. He stayed where he was, one hand still braced against the cot frame. And if I move too quickly, every guard in this wing will assume I have lost control again. I would prefer not to prove them right. That almost sounded dry, almost human in a way that startled her more than his eyes. He turned his palms out once more, a deliberate gesture of non-threat. May the healer approach you? He was asking, not directing. Asking. Rowena gave one short nod. Moraine came with a satchel and a small lamp, then hesitated at the iron around Rowena's wrists. The cuffs were pitted with old rust and scarred where files had failed to smooth the edges. These are not fortress issue, the healer murmured. They are not mine at all, Rowena said. Tobias's jaw hardened. Can they come off safely? With time. Then take the time. Moraine worked with a narrow pick and a wedge of oiled wood, easing metal a fraction at a time so it did not tear skin when it shifted. Rowena stood rigid through the first cuff, breath measured and shallow, while Tobias remained exactly where he had promised. She felt him in the room, the way she felt storm pressure before rain, impossible to ignore, but he did not crowd her with it. He did not lean in. He did not claim the right to close distance simply because the bond had named them. I am waiting for the turn, she thought. For the moment kindness becomes leverage. I am waiting for the sentence I know by heart. You owe me. Shelter for obedience. Protection for silence. Touch for survival. I am waiting because waiting kept me alive. But he is standing still while my skin shakes and my scars are counted in lamplight, and he is choosing restraint in front of witnesses who would excuse far worse. I do not know what to do with a man who treats power like a blade he keeps sheathed on purpose. When the first cuff finally opened, Rowena gasped at the sudden absence of weight. Skin beneath was angry and ridged, etched with old pressure lines. The second cuff resisted longer, then snapped with a brittle crack that made her flinch. It dropped to the stone floor. No one moved for a breath. Tobias swallowed hard. May I come closer? The room went silent again. Rowena surprised herself by saying, 2 steps. He obeyed precisely, then stopped. He looked at her raw wrists, and grief moved across his face so quickly she might have missed it if she had not been watching for cruelty. What she saw instead was fury turned inward, disciplined, contained, redirected. You are under my roof now, he said, voice low and steady. No one here will put iron on you again, not for punishment, not for debt. not for convenience. She heard the vow in it, also heard what he did not say. Not even me. Moraine wrapped Rowena's wrists in salve-soaked linen and secured the bandages. You both need food and sleep. Separate quarters. Immediately. Tobias nodded. Agreed. His eyes returned to Rowena. You will have a room near the infirmary with an inside lock. Keep it locked if that helps. If any guard pressures you, speak my name and it ends. And if saying your name causes more trouble, then say it louder. The corner of Moraine's mouth twitched despite herself. Rowena almost laughed and did not trust the sound, so she bit it back. A guard escorted her down the corridor to a narrow room with a pallet, a wash basin, and a shuttered window facing the inner yard. No bars, no chain ring in the wall. She tested the lock twice, then sat on the floor instead of the bed, cloak wrapped tight around her knees, pulse still erratic. By midday, after 2 failed attempts to sleep and 1 bowl of broth she could barely taste, she asked the quartermaster for work. Idleness left too much room for memory. He gave her a brush and a bucket and pointed toward the lower barracks, expression skeptical. Stone took water and grit in dark swirls as she scrubbed. Back and forth. Back and forth. A rhythm she knew. A rhythm that asked nothing except endurance. Bootsteps halted beside her. She did not look up at first. You do not owe labor for shelter, Tobias said. I owe myself proof I am not waiting to be moved like cargo, she answered, still scrubbing. Work helps. He considered that in silence, then crouched and took the spare brush from the bucket. Rowena stared. What are you doing? Sharing the floor. This is barrack stone. Yes. You are the Alpha King. His mouth curved without humor. Today I am a man who promised you would not serve as property in my house. He set brush to stone and scrubbed in even strokes beside her. Warriors passing the corridor slowed, did double takes, then kept walking at speed when his gaze lifted. One young soldier muttered, "This cannot be real," and nearly dropped his training spear when Tobias said, without looking up, "It is real. Grab a brush or keep moving." 3 more brushes appeared within minutes. No ceremony followed, no speech. Just the scrape of bristles and the smell of soap and old smoke, while rank dissolved into motion for the length of a corridor. Rowena's shoulders loosened before she noticed they had. At one point, Tobias's knuckles split on rough stone where a tile edge had chipped. He ignored it until she caught his wrist. You are bleeding. It is shallow. Still bleeding. He held still while she took a strip from the edge of her old cloak hem and wrapped it around his hand, practical and tight. Their skin met only briefly, but the contact carried a clean, startling warmth that traveled up her arm and settled under her ribs. Tobias's breath hitched once. He did not move to take more. By evening, the floors were done. Rowena returned to her room exhausted enough to sleep, she hoped, and barred the door. Sleep came in jagged pieces. When nightmare dragged her awake, it arrived with the old sounds: kennel chains, boots in corridors, Bram's voice counting punishment like inventory. She sat up too fast, breath tearing, palms slick. Then she heard it. A steady exhale beyond her door, deep and rhythmic. Not human. A wolf's breathing, patient as a metronome. Rowena rose and crossed to the door on silent feet, pressing her palm to the wood. Heat from a large body met her through the grain. She did not open it. She did not need to. The breathing continued, unhurried, anchoring the room until the shaking in her hands eased. He had said he would not enter without permission. He kept the line even in the dark. By the next morning, the entire lower keep knew the Alpha King had spent the night on stone outside a runaway servant's door, and rumor ran faster than dawn bells. It reached the market tribunal by noon. The tribunal dais stood at the center of the inner market, ringed by carved posts and old law banners faded by winter winds. Traders, warriors, and household staff crowded the perimeter in tense arcs. Rowena stood at the foot of the steps with two witness guards and Moraine at her side, wrists newly bandaged, chin level because lowering it felt too much like the old life. Council Elder Varric leaned forward from his carved seat, silver hair braided with iron beads. Rowena Darkhollow, brought from enemy lands without sponsorship, linked by unknown influence to last night's frenzy event. Do you deny calming armed males by unnatural means? I sang, Rowena said. Nothing more. Murmurs broke across the crowd. Another elder, female, stern-faced, tapped the law slate. A song that halted an alpha rupture is not nothing. We have precedent for containment marks until intent is proven. Containment marks. Branding with better vocabulary. Varric's gaze slid to her wrists, unimpressed by linen and salve. You came in irons. Some conditions exist for a reason. Rowena felt the old cold move up her spine, a practiced numbness trying to settle over panic. She opened her mouth, not sure whether she planned to plead or bite, and stopped when boots struck stone behind her. Tobias walked into the ring in plain dark leathers, no crown, no ceremonial cloak, only the thornwood crest at his shoulder, and the force of his presence turning conversation to silence. He did not take the high path to the dais. He came straight to Rowena and stopped half a step in front of her, a shield placed by choice. Containment marks are for violent offenders, he said, not for women who prevented bloodshed in my courtyard. Varric's expression tightened. Your concern is noted, Captain Thorne. Do not misname me in my own tribunal. Power rolled off Tobias in a controlled wave, not a roar, but a pressure that bent knees before pride could catch up. Around the ring, warriors dropped first, then merchants, then 3 of the 5 elders as the alpha aura settled over stone like gravity doubling. Varric resisted longest and failed with a strangled curse, one hand catching the edge of his chair as he sank. Tobias did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I concealed rank for war strategy, not to invite legal theater at a survivor's expense. Record this in open ledger. Rowena Darkhollow is under sanctuary by my blood and by Fortress Law Clause 7. Mountain Code Revision. Any threat, mark, seizure, or insult enacted against her is a direct challenge to the throne. The scribe at the side table nearly fumbled his stylus, then scratched furiously. The stern-faced elder lifted her head with visible effort. Sanctuary can be temporary. Not this one. On what grounds? Varric grated from one knee. Tobias turned slightly, enough to bring Rowena into full view of the tribunal. His expression shifted, becoming something harder to weaponize and harder to deny. On the grounds that she is my fated mate, witnessed by healer and guard. On the grounds that she has committed no crime in this territory. On the grounds that this council will not repeat Eastern brutality under mountain banners while I breathe. Shock cracked through the market like struck ice. Some faces registered awe, others, fear. A few, calculation. Rowena felt every gaze land on her and expected the old collapse inside, the reflex to disappear. It did not come. Her pulse raced, yes, but alongside it rose a steadier current she had touched only in fragments, the knowledge that she was not standing alone while men debated whether she counted as human. Varric's mouth thinned. And if the mate claim compromises judgment? Then challenge me in lawful circle, Tobias said. Name date and witnesses. Until then, mind your jurisdiction. No one spoke. Moraine stepped forward with brisk precision that cut tension at the knees. The accused is not accused. This hearing is concluded. Someone bring these elders water before they pretend they chose to kneel. A brittle ripple of laughter moved through the outer ring, brief and disbelieving, but it shifted the crowd from threat to momentum. People began to stand. Traders pulled children closer. Scribes sealed pages. The tribunal dissolved in practical noise. Rowena stayed where she was until Tobias turned back to her. Up close, she saw the fine tremor in his hands, the cost of holding that much control in public without letting rage tip into harm. "You should not have had to hear that alone," he said quietly. She studied him, this man who could have claimed her by force of bond or throne and had chosen law, witness, and her consent instead. The trade-offs were non-trivial. She knew that now. Protecting her openly gave his enemies a target and his counsel a grievance. He did it anyway. "Thank you," she said, the words unfamiliar and entirely true. His gaze softened. "Are you frightened?" "Yes," she admitted, "but not of you." Something in his face eased, like a drawn bow finally lowered. He offered his forearm, not her hand, a warrior's escort instead of a captor's grip. After a brief pause, Rowena set her fingers against leather and scar and let him guide her down from the tribunal stone, not behind him, but beside him, while the market watched and made way. The stone stairs ended at the lower arcade. Tobias glanced at her before the crowd thickened and kept his voice low. "May I guide you through this?" Rowena gave a short nod, and only then did he take her forearm, not releasing her until they were clear of the press and inside the shadowed passage that led toward the command wing. Guards pivoted into formation around them with quiet efficiency, and Rowena felt the weight of their caution settle like a second cloak across her shoulders. A runner rounded the far corner at full speed, skidding on worn flagstones. He dropped to one knee so abruptly his satchel thudded against the floor. "Message from Eastwatch Ridge," he said, breath sawing. "Urgent, for the throne." Tobias took the oilskin packet, broke the wax, and read fast. The steadiness he had worn in the tribunal hardened into something colder. "What is it?" Rowena asked. He handed her the top sheet. It was not a letter. It was a broadside, cheap paper printed in thick black ink and stamped with a counterfeit mountain seal. Her name stretched across the center in block script: Rowena Darkhollow, plague bearer and enchanter. Beneath it, a list of invented crimes and a bounty promise from Eastern warpacks for lawful retrieval. Her stomach turned. "There are dozens," the runner said. "Maybe hundreds. Nailed to wayposts, market walls, caravan carts. Someone paid coin to spread them fast." Tobias's voice dropped a register. "Who signed it?" "Jasper Duskwalker." The name landed like a blade she had expected and still could not dodge. Tobias folded the broadside once, precisely, then looked at Captain Elric, who had appeared at the corridor mouth. "War room. Now. Bring Moraine, Keeper Lynn, and the treaty ledgers." They moved through two guarded doors and into a chamber carved directly into the mountain face, maps pinned from floor to ceiling, rune lamps burning low over a central table. Rowena stood near the edge while Tobias laid out the papers one by one. Every sheet bore a variation of the same lie: seductress, infiltrator, carrier of curse-wrought, stolen royal metal hidden on her person. At that line, her pulse skipped. Keeper Lynn, thin and silver-haired, adjusted his lenses and read in silence. "He is building legal pretext," the old archivist said at last. "If he can paint her as a biohazard and political spy, neutral councils can demand quarantine transfer without admitting they are aiding him." Elric spread a border map flat and pinned it with a dagger. "And if we refuse, transfer." "Jasper claims treaty obstruction," Tobias said. "Then he goads us into crossing neutral boundaries during any retrieval attempt. One unsanctioned incursion, and he calls coalition grievance." Moraine swore under her breath. "He wants war with cleaner handwriting." Rowena stared at the forged seal until the ink blurred. Jasper was not hunting a runaway servant anymore. He was arranging an entire region around her body, as if she were a piece on a board he could slide until kingdoms bled. Tobias turned to her, expression controlled but intent. "There is more. Eastwatch intercepted a courier at dawn. He carried this." He passed over a second document, this one in real wax and harder script, addressed to the Moon Oath Conclave. "By covenant custom, All disputed sanctuary claims would be reviewed publicly at the Moon Goddess Temple in 7 nights. Petitioners could present witness, bloodline proof, or formal challenge under sacred law. Jasper had filed all three. I know this game, Rowena thought, and the recognition chilled her deeper than the mountain air. I know men who build cages out of rules, then call the cage justice because they filed the lock correctly. He is not trying to convince everyone I am dangerous. He is trying to make every option costly until Tobias must either surrender me or break law in front of the world. I survived one fortress by learning where power hides. Here it hides in ledgers, seals, and sacred wording. I have a signet stitched in my sleeve and no proof I have the right to carry it. If I reveal it too early, he takes it. If I hide it too long, he writes me into silence. Her fingers brushed the inner seam of her cloak. The metal beneath it gave a faint, living thrum. What does he actually want? She asked quietly. Me dead, or me displayed? Displayed first, Keeper Lynn said. Dead after, if useful. No one contradicted him. Tobias planted both palms on the table. Then we deny him theater. Rowena does not leave fortress grounds until the oath gathering. We control routes, guest lists, and altar access. Elric, double inner watch. Lynn, audit every document Jasper cites and mark forgeries. Moraine, keep Rowena near the infirmary wing and temple archives only. Rowena lifted her chin. You forgot one order. His gaze flicked to her. Which one? Ask what I choose. Silence tightened for a heartbeat. Then Tobias nodded once, slow and unflinching. What do you choose? I choose not to be hidden in a cellar while others decide whether I exist. If this goes to the Moon Oath floor, I stand there. A primary muscle in his jaw jumped. Standing there paints a target on your chest. Being absent paints one anyway. Elric looked between them, then exhaled. She is right, Majesty. Rumor feeds on empty space. Tobias's eyes never left Rowena. Then you stand. But you do not stand unguarded. By the first snowfall of the waning moon, the fortress had changed cadence. Traitors were screened at outer gates. Tower horns ran new signal patterns, and every corridor held the restless pressure of soldiers waiting for the next strike. Rowena spent daylight hours with Keeper Lynn in the archive gallery, copying old sanctuary clauses until ink stained her fingers and legal language lodged in her bones. At dusk, she walked the inner ramparts with Moraine, memorizing temple routes and fallback chambers. Night was worse. Night left room for wanting. She found Tobias in the training court after curfew, shirt damp, breath visible in white bursts, while he ran blade forms against 3 sparring posts in brutal, measured succession. He did not hear her at first. Or he did, and finished anyway, forcing each movement to clean completion before turning. You should be sleeping, he said. So should you. He set the practice sword down. Sleep and I are in negotiations. That earned a brief, unwilling curve from her mouth. Who is winning? Not me. They stood on opposite sides of the court circle, moonlight silvering frost along the stones. The bond between them was no longer a shock. It had become a persistent current, an awareness that sharpened whenever he was near, steady enough now to map his restraint as clearly as his strength. I read the Covenant Addendum, she said. If Jasper invokes bloodline challenge, testimony alone is weak unless supported by relic or rite. You are thinking of the signet. She went still. How did you know? The day your cuffs came off, you guarded your left sleeve as if it held your pulse. His tone stayed even. I did not ask because I would not force another disclosure from you. She stepped closer by 1 pace, then stopped. If I show it, and it is what I fear it is, this ceases to be gossip. It becomes succession. Evidence suggests it already has. His gaze softened, but the underlying tension did not. Whatever that ring proves, Jasper is moving as if he believes it can unmake me or crown him through you. A gust swept the court, carrying pine smoke and distant snow. Rowena drew a breath and made the decision she had postponed since the ledgers burned. She slid a finger beneath the seam stitch, pulled the thread loose, and tipped the signet into her palm. Silver, black, metal. Crescent crown. Branching runes that seemed dormant until Tobias looked directly at them. Amber lit in his irises, bright and instinctive. Not hunger. Recognition. He did not touch the ring. Lunar house metal, he said, voice roughened by something close to reverence. I have seen one like it only once, in my grandfather's war vault. So it is real. It is older than current packs, older than my lines claim. A brittle laugh escaped her. I stole a kingdom token while scraping ash and did not even know which kingdom. His mouth shifted, almost a smile, quickly gone. For accuracy, you recovered it. From a room that exploded. Still recovered. The tension between them eased by a fraction, enough to breathe. Then Tobias took one careful step into her space and stopped with clear room left between them. Rowena, he said, low and unwavering, I want to touch you. I am not entitled to it. Her pulse climbed. Fear did not vanish, but it no longer ruled the whole field. Then ask. May I? Yes. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to retreat, and settled at the side of her neck, thumb resting just below her ear where her heartbeat jumped against skin. The contact was warm and devastatingly gentle, and the bond answered with a low thrum under her ribs. Not possession, not command, but recognition meeting. Recognition in open air. She leaned into it before she could dress the impulse in caution. He closed his eyes once, briefly, as if absorbing impact. If this becomes too much, say stop. She nodded. He lowered his hand first. 3 days passed before the first external replies to Tobias's dispatches returned. The Northern Coalition sent polite delay, citing incomplete evidence. The river packs offered prayers and no troops. A neutral magistrate confirmed attendance at the Moon Oath, but refused prejudgment. Each answer narrowed the framework without closing it. Jasper had timed his campaign well. No one wanted to commit before seeing who would fall. On the eve of the gathering, temple bells began tolling before sundown, summoning delegates to the mountain sanctuary above the fortress. The ascent wound through cedar groves and carved stairways dusted with new snow, torches burning blue-white in protective brackets. Rowena rode in a closed escort with Moraine and 6 guards, signet now secured in a chain pouch at her sternum under layered wool. Tobias rode ahead with Elric, visible and armed, his posture radiating disciplined calm that fooled no one who knew him well. The temple complex opened across the upper plateau, concentric stone courts, moon-runed columns, and a central hall roofed in black slate that caught the first stars like broken glass. Pilgrims and petitioners moved through screening arches while clerics checked names against wax tablets. It should have felt holy. It felt like a hinge before a storm. Inside the antechamber, Keeper Lynn spread documents over a narrow table. Sequence is fixed. Jasper's petition first, yours second. If he pushes for immediate transfer, invoke Sanctuary Clause 7 and Bloodline Review Protocol. Rowena nodded, though the script in her head had already shifted from legal phrasing to raw instinct. Too many unknown faces in cleric robes. Too many sealed crates stacked near the incense braziers that no one claimed. She stepped to the doorway and scanned the outer corridor. A novice brushed past carrying lamp oil. The scent trailed wrong, sharp and medicinal beneath the cedar incense. Not lamp oil. Rowena turned fast. Elric, stop that boy. Elric moved, barking orders. The novice bolted, dropping the jug. It shattered on the stone, releasing a white vapor that climbed in fast coils. Guards nearest the spill coughed and staggered. Seal the inner doors! Tobias roared from the hall. The first explosion hit the south transept, not flame but concussive force that blew shutters inward and knocked two pillars off true. Screams ripped through the temple courts as smoke poured through vent grates. From the north cloister came the clash of steel and the unmistakable snarl of shifted wolves in confined space. "This is coordinated," Elric shouted. "Strike teams in pilgrim garb." Moraine shoved a damp cloth into Rowena's hands. "Cover your mouth. Move." Rowena caught Tobias's sleeve as he passed. "They are not here to burn records. They are here for me." His eyes locked on hers, fierce and clear. Then they fail. A horn sounded from the roofline, one long note that cut through smoke and panic. Not Thornwood. Eastern war signal. From the blown transept arch, silhouettes emerged in iron-gray cloaks, moving with predatory precision through the haze. At their center walked a broad-shouldered male with braided hair and a pale, unreadable face. Rowena knew before he crossed, fully into light. Jasper Duskwalker stopped at the edge of the central court and smiled without warmth. "Alive," he told his strike captain, gaze fixed on Rowena. "Take her alive." Tobias stepped in front of her as the first attackers lunged and the temple floor dissolved into chaos. Steel rang against steel in the smoke-thick court, and the sound was wrong in sacred space. Too metallic, too hungry. Thornwood guards formed a wedge around the inner dais, trying to hold two choke points at once while Jasper's strike wolves drove in from the broken transept with disciplined brutality, never overcommitting, always pressing toward one objective: Rowena. Jasper did not shout orders the way lesser alphas did. He moved through the fight with eerie economy, one hand behind his back, the other drawing short, precise signals for his captains. She saw it in a single clear slice between bodies. He was staging spectacle as much as attack, forcing witnesses to see Tobias defending a claimed mate inside neutral sanctum. Every angle of this had been chosen in advance. Elric slammed into one of the iron-gray wolves and drove him sideways into a cracked column. Moraine dragged two coughing clerics behind a toppled altar and barked for wet cloths. Keeper Lynn knelt beside the law table with one arm over the treaty ledgers, as if paper itself were a living thing he could shield. A second blast shook the north wall. Dust and powdered mortar rained from the rafters. Several delegates screamed and broke for the side exits, only to recoil when Jasper's outer ring sealed those corridors with armed men in pilgrim robes. "Tobias Thornwood," Jasper called across the court, his voice carrying cleanly through panic. "Yield the woman for quarantine review, and I leave your temple standing." Tobias's answering growl vibrated through Rowena's sternum. "You breached consecrated ground under false banners. There is no law that covers your filth." "There is always law," Jasper said, smiling faintly. "If one has scribes." Two strike wolves rushed from Rowena's left flank. She ducked instinctively as Tobias pivoted, caught one by the throat, and threw him into the ruined balustrade hard enough to fracture stone. The second reached for her cloak chain, claws grazing wool before Elric intercepted with a brutal shoulder check and drove him to his knees. Rowena stumbled backward toward the central rune circle, lungs burning from smoke and fear. The chain pouch under her layers thudded against her chest with every heartbeat, the signet inside feeling suddenly hot, almost impatient. "I can run behind his guard and wait to be taken or saved like cargo again. I can let men who understand war decide whether I stay breathing. I can become the thing Jasper named, a disputed object traded in legal language until somebody wins possession. No, the crux is not survival by hiding. The crux is narrative control. If Jasper defines this as abduction, Tobias bleeds legitimacy whether he wins or loses. If I define it as sovereign challenge under sacred law, witnesses must follow ritual. He wants shadows and confusion. I can drag him into the center where everyone must watch." She ripped the chain pouch free, pulled out the silver-black signet, and cut her palm with the small blade she still carried in her belt seam. Pain flashed bright and immediate, Blood welled across skin. "Rowena, back!" Tobias shouted, seeing the knife. She ignored him, stepped fully into the central circle, and dropped to one knee at the heart rune etched in moonstone. Her bloody palm pressed to the signet face, then she pressed both to the carved crescent at her feet. The temple answered. Light ran through the old channels like thaw water through frozen roots. First a faint thread, then a surge that lit every ring of the circle in silver-white fire. Gasps broke around the chamber as dormant royal marks climbed the columns, revealing symbols no current pack had used in generations. The smoke seemed to recoil from it. Rowena lifted her head and sang, not softly, not for comfort. The lullaby came out in a binding cadence, each note sharpened into command. The melody that had once hidden fear now carried authority, vibrating through stone and bone with a rhythm that tangled Jasper's advance line mid-stride. 3 of his wolves faltered as if they had forgotten the pattern of their own limbs. Jasper's calm finally cracked. "Stop her!" None of his men could cross the inner ring. The runes flared each time they tried, throwing them back with searing arcs of light. Tobias froze at the edge, eyes wide not with fear of power, but with recognition of law unfolding in real time. Rowena kept singing until the final phrase landed like a struck bell. Then she stood, blood still running down her wrist, and spoke in a voice that surprised her with its steadiness. "By Lunar House right and witnessed seal, I invoke sovereign challenge. Jasper Duskwalker, you stand accused of false petition, treaty sabotage, and sacrilege by armed breach. Face judgment in direct contest or submit and be bound." For a suspended second, nobody moved. Keeper Lynn, voice shaking, called from behind the law table. "Invocation is valid, witnessed by conclave delegates and temple clergy." A cleric staggered to his feet, eyes fixed on the blazing runes. "The circle has accepted. Refusal is confession." Jasper's nostrils flared, his gaze tracked from the lit glyphs to the blood on Rowena's hand, then to the signet. Calculation raced behind his pale eyes, trade-offs reassembling under pressure. If he refused, he lost the legal theater he had built. If he accepted, he entered a fight on terms he had not scripted. He laughed once, harsh and disbelieving. A servant girl reciting dead law. Rowena met him without blinking. A king killer hiding behind forged paper. The insult landed. So did the witnesses hearing it. Jasper peeled off his cloak and tossed it aside. "Then watch closely," he said to the court. "I end this counterfeit bloodline myself." He shifted in a violent ripple, bones and muscle reforming into a massive iron-gray wolf scarred across muzzle and shoulder, larger than any natural beast, eyes bright with malice and old hunger. He lunged straight for Rowena. The binding cadence still hummed in the circle. She sang one clipped phrase and slashed her bleeding hand through the air in a downward arc. Jasper's stride hit an invisible snag. His forelegs stuttered for half a beat, body torque breaking rhythm just enough to expose the vulnerable line of his throat. "Tobias," she shouted, "now!" Tobias shifted on the leap, human form blurring into a black, furred wolfman with blazing amber gaze and rune-lit forearms. He collided with Jasper midair. The impact shattered a half-broken pillar and sent both alphas skidding across the slick stone in a whirlwind of claws, snarls, and cracked masonry. The fight compressed into brutal close quarters. Jasper fought dirty and fast, trying to force Tobias toward the damaged transept where footing failed and support beams leaned. Tobias absorbed the angle, pivoted, and drove Jasper back toward open moonlight instead. Every time Jasper tried to disengage and circle toward Rowena, she cut him off with sharp, sung cadences that disrupted his timing, forcing him into Tobias's reach again. Minutes into the duel, the temple bells began hammering emergency sequence overhead, each toll a reminder that the entire plateau was watching. Jasper scored Tobias's shoulder. Tobias answered by raking Jasper's flank and slamming him into the judgment stone. Debris sprayed. Delegates flinched. Elric kept the perimeter locked, shouting for no one to break witness line. Jasper twisted under Tobias's weight and snapped, "You tethered yourself to weakness." Tobias's voice came out raw, feral, and clear. "You keep mistaking cruelty for strength." Jasper surged with desperate force, throwing Tobias off for one brief opening. He bounded toward Rowena, jaws wide, intent unmistakable. She did not retreat. She lifted the signet, now slick with her blood and radiant with awakened runes. "By witnessed law," she cried, "I render verdict." She hurled the signet. It struck Jasper high in the chest as he lunged. On contact, the crescent crown ignited in a burst of silver-gold fire, royal sigil searing through his momentum. He convulsed mid-stride, staggered, and crashed to the stones hard enough to crack the outer ring. Tobias hit him an instant later, pinning him chest down with crushing precision, one forearm locking Jasper's neck, while clawed hand anchored his shoulder. Jasper thrashed once, twice, then failed to break free. Even pinned, he found breath for one final sneer, voice gurgling with hatred. "You made a servant your queen, and that weakness will end you." Tobias tightened his hold, amber burning in his gaze as he answered for every witness in the hall. "You mistook mercy for weakness and love for leverage." Then he delivered the killing bite at Jasper's throat under full conclave witness, clean and final. Silence crashed down after the sound stopped. Jasper's body went slack beneath him. The iron-gray fur receded in uneven waves, leaving a still human form on sacred stone, challenge nullified by right and verdict both. Around the court, Jasper's remaining strike wolves froze, scenting the end before law named it. Keeper Lynn found his voice first, thin but unwavering. By sovereign challenge and witness defeat, Jasper Duskwalker's claim is void. His war petition is extinguished. The cleric at the center staff lifted trembling hands. So witnessed. One by one, weapons lowered. Several of Jasper's captains dropped to their knees and bared their throats in surrender protocol. Eyes averted from Tobias, from Rowena, from the lit runes still blazing around her. Tobias shifted back to human form with a shudder and rose unsteadily, blood at his shoulder, chest heaving. He turned immediately toward Rowena, taking one step as if to reach her, then stopping at the ring's edge, waiting for her signal even now. Rowena's knees nearly gave. Adrenaline drained so fast the world tilted at the edges, but she stayed upright, hand still bleeding, signet lying between her and Jasper's fallen body like a seal pressed into history. Across the ruined temple, survivors stared at her not as rumor, not as contraband, but as the woman who had dragged a warlord into law and ended him where everyone could see. Rowena drew one shaking breath, then another, and lowered her bleeding hand. The rune fire around the circle softened from blinding silver to a steady glow. Tobias still waited at its edge, chest lifting hard, blood dark on his shoulder, every line of him held in check until she chose. She stepped over the scorched groove in the stone and crossed the distance. He reached for her only when she lifted her chin in clear permission. His hand settled at her waist, careful despite their tremor, and the contact steadied the room. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" he asked, voice torn rough. "Just my hand." Her gaze dropped to the blood at his shoulder. "You are not just your shoulder. It can wait." He looked at her as if he had been holding one breath since the courtyard and had only now remembered air existed. "Rowena, we still stand under witness law. I will not let this moment be taken from you by noise and panic. If you want distance, I give it. If you want time, I give it." A temple cleric approached with the central staff, face ash pale but composed. "Sovereign challenge is complete. Bond right may be witnessed now, delayed, or refused. Choice rests with both parties." Tobias turned slightly so everyone could hear him, then dropped to one knee on shattered stone. The movement sent a ripple through the delegates. An alpha king did not kneel lightly, and never like this. He bowed his head and bared the side of his throat, exposing the pulse line in an old reversal of dominance custom. Rowena Darkhollow, he said, every word precise. Do you consent to my mark? Her pulse hammered. Fear moved through her, yes, but so did the deep current that had been building from the first note of the lullaby. Yes. He lifted his head enough to meet her eyes. Do you consent freely, without pressure from throne, council, or bond? Yes. Freely. His hand tightened once at her waist, then loosened. Do you still consent now? She placed her palm against his jaw, blood and all. Yes, Tobias, I choose this. Only then did he rise. He took the cloth from Moraine's outstretched hand and bound Rowena's palm first, knotting it with battlefield care so the cut would close. Moraine gave him a look that was half healer's warning, half fierce relief. You two will come to infirmary after this, she said. That was not a request. It is noted, Tobias answered, then returned all his focus to Rowena. She tipped her head, exposing the junction of neck and shoulder. The temple had gone very quiet. She felt his breath warm against skin, heard his swallow, then the controlled pressure of his teeth as he bit down exactly where he had asked to place his claim. Pain flared, sharp enough to pull a sound from her throat, but it did not stay pain. Heat followed it in a widening wave, clean and bright, pouring through muscle and spine, through old fear lodged behind her ribs, through every place she had braced for harm and found none. Her fingers gripped his shoulders. The world narrowed to pulse, breath, and light. Golden threads spilled from the mark, visible in the dusk-dark temple air, winding from his skin to hers like living filament. The bond opened all the way. She felt him, not as command, as truth. His memory of the gate the first night, rage breaking him open until her song found him. His sleepless vigil outside her door, counting each of her nightmares through wood and stone. His terror when Jasper lunged, his reverence now so deep it was almost grief. Mine, the bond whispered from him, not possessive, but awed. Yours, she answered without speaking, and felt it land. Mate. Both of them at once, the word resonant and absolute. Tobias released the bite with reverent care and pressed his forehead to hers, eyes bright with amber and exhaustion and joy he was no longer trying to hide. No cage, no chains, only choice, he whispered. She touched the fresh mark at her neck, then took his left wrist, where old rune lines crossed vein and tendon. Then I choose you, in blood, in moonlight, in every life. She bared her teeth and bit. His breath broke on a low, startled sound as her mark sank in. The bond answered in a second surge, stronger, braided now in both directions. She felt his control, his fury, his tenderness, and underneath all of it the quiet vow he had made the day her cuffs fell. Never again iron, never again ownership disguised as order. The glow between them stabilized into a warm, steady current that settled beneath skin rather than blazing outward. When she let go, he looked at her like dawn over a battlefield. Mine, he murmured, touching her cheek. Yours, she said, hand over his marked wrist. Mate. Behind them, Keeper Lynn found enough composure to speak the legal close. Witnessed mutual claim under temple authority, recorded as sovereign bond and lawful co-rule eligibility. Elric exhaled like he had been bracing for a collapse that never came. Around the court, surrendered Duskwalker captains lowered their heads fully. Varric, ash-streaked and limping from falling masonry, sank to both knees and bowed. I challenged what I did not understand, he said hoarsely. I submit formal apology to my queen and king. Rowena met his gaze. You submit to law. Keep doing that, and we can call it repair. By the first thaw, The high hall at Thornwood Fortress blazed with torchlight for the Unity Accord, not a war council. Jasper's forged broadsides lay on the evidence table beside his real courier petition, each stamped void and entered into archive record. Keeper Lynn read every line into ledger while neutral magistrates watched, then sealed the packet in black wax for permanent storage. External replies were read in full. The Northern Coalition's delay was withdrawn after Temple witness testimony. The River Pact sent grain and border medics instead of condolences. The neutral magistrate recognized the challenge verdict as binding, ending Jasper's treaty claim. Rowena stood beside Tobias beneath the carved moon crest, crown of silver branches resting against dark hair, not ornamental and never silent. When war decrees were raised against remaining Eastern holdouts, she used her first veto and required sanctuary review first. Elric backed the enforcement plan without hesitation. Moraine became high healer over both territories and wrote the new Mark Law herself. No punitive branding, no dead irons, no exceptions. Varric kept his seat only after swearing that same statute in public and funding restitution from his own estates. At Rowena's request, the first sanctuary docket heard survivors from Duskwalker lands. Mara came in with a caravan of freed servants, thinner than Rowena remembered but standing straight. She stopped in the center aisle, eyes wet and stubborn. "I told them at the gate I once saw a girl run and said nothing," she said. "Thought that was the only brave thing left in me." "It was enough to start," Rowena answered, descending from the dais to clasp her forearms. "Now stay and help us build the rest." Overseer Bram was brought in chains 2 hearings later on testimony from those same servants, and this time Law did not hide him. At Spring Moon Festival, the mountain plateau filled before sunset. Children wove between bonfires with ribboned lanterns while wolves in ceremonial paint kept easy perimeter watch, relaxed for the first time in seasons. Rowena stood at the central terrace in deep blue wool, her pregnancy visible beneath a silver-belted mantle, Tobias's hand spread protectively over hers at the curve of her belly. Their people knelt when the bells sounded, not in fear, but in pledge. She began the lullaby. Voices joined, first the temple clerics, then warriors, then traders and former servants, until the song that once belonged to hiding became a public oath of protection sung under open sky. Tobias looked down at her with that same fierce, astonished devotion, and she leaned into him, bond settled and warm, future no longer a trap with 2 locked doors but a road they were already walking together.